Pax aeterna, pax per sanitatem spiritualem.
Rápido.
Yes, that's right, folks. I just dropped some Latin at you this bright o'clock in the morning. DJ Zed, take it away, good man. Greetings and salutations, hello and namaste, in the most intense meaning of that term. How am I just now having this thought, DJ Zed? We need to make a track where like the one robot voice word in the song is namaste. And we just like fuck with it? Like, how have we not done that yet? It's on the list now. DJ said, Mr. Zeppo collaborating at you first thing this morning, bright and early on this special wild card rando episode of the Almost Daily ZenCast. On today's episode, a serious discussion about peace through spiritual healing. ¿Qué onda, mis amigos latinos de todo el mundo? Saludos, bienvenidos al programa. Si se me olvida que hablo español también y tengo que utilizar eso más seguido, güey. Entonces, aquí estoy. En español, un poquito de Spanglish on this episode. Welcome to the show, folks. It's still me, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. I have always known Spanish. Y'all just didn't realize if you're just now finding out. Welcome to the day you found out I'm not what you think I am. I'm something else entirely. That's just like an ongoing inside joke because people assume everything and anything before they correctly evaluate and guesstimate that I am more than Latinx. I'm native Spanish speaker from a different country, which is why I play with being a simulant synthetic life form from another dimension, because I appear to be one thing, but I'm dramatically something else, and yet entirely exactly what I am. It'll all make sense in the long run. Welcome to the show, folks. I'm your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. It is 8:01 a.m. in the morning, Pacific Standard Time, on a Thursday in March, the 10th day of the calendar cycle, in a timeline where the calendar year is reportedly 2022. Thanks for tuning in. O despacito, como quieras, como prefieres. What's up, friends? here we are, together again for the very first time in the Imaginarium of our inner minds, that special daydreamy place we all go to when we get truly entertained by a piece of media. Whether you're rocking out to a really good track, or tuning into a really deep thought, or sort of zoning out to something in between the two extremes, that is what I call that sort of lucid other place that we go to when we let our imaginations run a bit wild in synchronicity with a sort of counter positional media consumption of some kind. And I invoke that specifically because of lived experience. The conditions under which I get the most carried away, swept up in lucid visualizations of which I'm not struggling or working hard in my brain, in my conscious awareness, to generate them, right? Where it's fun and buoyant, and it's like suddenly I'm watching a movie that how did I make this? It's like I'm dreaming in the daytime with my eyes open. Or, when I'm reading, if I'm reading a really captivating book, my body seems to disappear, and I seem to tell it as when I go to sleep, very similar to, but obviously wholly different from. So a book, a really great piece of music that's just like evocative will sometimes seduce my imagination into generating in a sort of, I don't have to do the work. The part of me that is the part of me that dreads doing hard work, right? That struggles to come up with words for a page when I'm sitting there like me, trying to be an author, trying to write those pages. That part melts away, and visualizations of an unpredictable nature that I'm not directing consciously, which of course are evolving from and through some hidden subterranean subconscious but clearly very powerful metacognitive process. And I choose my words very carefully, for I do not know authoritatively about that which I speak. I'm only trying to describe to you what I've experienced and what I've encountered others describe to me that they've experienced, try to put it together in a scientific theory. What does that have to do with manifesting peace on earth? Well, first of all, it has everything to do with this show. The whole point of this show, in my mind, the way I've tried to stumble my way into doing it, is to be evocative of that situation. You, dear listener, are choosing to spend your time with this, the sound of my voice, slowly percolating into your mind. And so I invite you, dear friends, all of you, in the singular and the collective, wherever you may be listening from around the world, and we do have some listeners from around the world, dear friends. Ding! Let's take a moment to honor and thank that. Just from the analytics for the last 30 days, never mind the whole, I don't have access to lifetime. I wish I did. I'm not paying for that level of the platform because it's expensive. It's obviously it's meant for a different caliber of job-creating entrepreneur, at which I'm not there yet. But with your help someday, perhaps, knock on wood, not perhaps, definitely together, through a coalition of manifesting, will create a little media empire. But I digress. So just from the last 30 days, hello and namaste to audience members from the Netherlands, from Ireland, from Pakistan, from Sweden, and I don't know, I'm confused. Why is there a tiny small nation somewhere by the name of Jersey that I'm not aware of, and because I'm an ignorant fool that wears a clown nose and mocks himself for being an ignorant fool, or is the state of New Jersey for some reason stuck here between Sweden and Spain? If there's a whole tiny country of Jersey I've never heard of, hello and welcome to the show. I am so sorry that I am so underinformed. But I bet you most of the world is unaware of your existence. But welcome in the community. We got listeners from Spain, from France, from Afghanistan, from Brazil, from Barbados, Australia, Mexico, Canada, Germany, United Kingdom, Puerto Rico, India, and the United States. Greetings and salutations, friends. I wish I was more of a hobbyist, billionaire playboy, and that I had, because of my hobbyist, billionaire upbringing, learned 50 languages so that I could, without it being an afterthought, without it being any kind of struggle, just say a few words to you all in your native tongue. But I didn't grow up that way. Not in my real life as the artist that this flesh carcass is, the life that this avatar has experienced. I'm not that lucky. But in the literary fictional comic book universe version of me that you can read all about in Wattpad, that's sort of the thing, right? He's sort of like if Batman were a stoner, disc jockey, adventurist, playboy wannabe, instead of Bruce Wayne, he's this dude. I still haven't come up with a great Bruce Wayne identity for my character. Not to step on or infringe on DC character comics. It's also parlance of the culture, right? The secret identity and, all of that stuff. But it's not Wattpad Wednesdays today. I apologize for that tangent. Not going to let it spiral too far out of control. We'll nip that right in the bud. Greetings and welcomes from around the world, friends. Thank you so much. Your audienceship is much appreciated. And if you dig what's going on with these audio waves in this podcast, by all means, do indeed inform your friends about it. Smash that follow button, hit that like widget, share the retweetable springboard thingamabob, and clip the clippies on your clip-a-things, and social media cannon bombs this humble, rough around the edges, gem, diamond in the rough podcast of podcasts at your social media friends. Not for my sake. I don't want the ego stroke of seeing my own product out in the wild, as it were. I want to be able to make this my primary hustle, work from home, and hire people, and that requires a wellspring, an uprising of a grassroots movement of loyal, long-time listeners who are like, yeah, this guy's a weirdo, but I get what he's trying to do, and more people should listen so that he can bootstrap himself into a better product through, just the growth of the whole phenomena. That's the vision. If there's one thing at the very top of the corkboard that we all know about now, as I've over-explained it a few times. If you haven't heard about that yet, you will in a hot second. Just keep your ears open and your eyes closed, and we'll get along fine. Okay, so what are we talking about today for reals, friends? My dear friends around the world, peace, love, and grooviness They're not just cheesy words from the 70s. They're not just something to laugh at on your Facebook friends page posts. That was a very poorly constructed sentence, and I apologize to you. But I offer it up on the altar of evidence that this show is real, raw, radically unscripted, 100% genuinely, authentically sincere, honest, and if not the truth, definitely truthy enough, because it's coming from the cockles of my heart. Truly and sincerely, the very deepest of my most deepest. I'm peaking a little too hard. Let me see. I'm trying to find that balance. And also, I think some recent update changed the audio balance dynamics of this device. But who knows? What are we really talking about today? Peace through spiritual healing. Duh. If you're a long-time listener, you might be a little exhausted hearing me say peace through or spiritual healing, right? Like the through line that brings us together in this show all the time, all day long, every day, is the notion that that not only are we capable of, but that it is our birthright to embody a deep and profound spiritual healing. Not hocus pocus nonsense, impossible to achieve within the bounds of the known and yet to be discovered guidelines of how reality works, but something organic that qualifies as what I, in the terms that I'm using, a transformative spiritual healing that requires a collective and individual effort on our part. And I'm not peddling some prepackaged hocus pocus from this group or that group or that ideology or this ideology or the closest I come to that is a deep appreciation for whoever created inner worlds, outer worlds. And even at that level, because I'm about to quote them, I'm not pretending to be an acolyte or a devotee and insisting everyone believe in this thing, right? Like, no, I'm encouraging people to go watch it. If you've never seen Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, which is now available, I think, for purchase as a DVD, and there's spin-off things, and it's all kind of expanded. But the original, 4 or 5 part YouTube homemade documentary series, because it is sort of a professional level passion project by one guy. I don't think there's any kind of massive studio behind it. There's just a dude and some friends and whatever resources he had at his disposal. An inspiration at that level, right? Because it's a pretty well made piece of documentary film. And I choose to call it a documentary film because I refuse to categorize it as fiction. It is indeed, of course, a document that has statements and claims that some people in this world, quite a lot actually, many people in this world, unfortunately, tragically, irrationally, in my opinion, although they wouldn't agree, just deny or reject outright, out of hand, often in association with various other judgments and or assessments and or logical conclusions drawn from certain choices made beyond the scope of what I'm actually talking about, such as like being an atheist or being a materialist or being an objectivist, all of which are various identity-associated ideological constructs that influence one's world view. Now, curiously, a lot of people out there are arguing against spirituality, against the power of prayer, against the meaningfulness of rite and ritual and sacred process as a form of practice, because they cling to some preconceived of, in other words, they may think that they've achieved some sort of personal conclusion, but what they're actually saying is, I've chosen this singular or this mashup combination of ideological constructs that have been handed down to me from prior generations that define the world as excluding such phenomena as X, Y, and Z, which then lead me to believe that whatever any joker has to say in the realm of spirituality is automatically, categorically wrong. And I dare say, friends, one should look at that entire line of reasoning, or that entire course of rationale, or anything similar that expresses the same sorts of things, perhaps with different variables, or in different arrangements, or in different algorithmic structures, but any kind of statement of denial in the same sort of modality, we should take those and go, whoa, wait a minute. Why don't we set them aside for a hot second and question in the opposite direction? Because what are they helping us with? Nothing except the preclusion, the preemptive preclusion of what arguably would be a very powerful tool towards solving the world's problems. Without replacing these previous limiting belief factors, right? Like, I'm not saying chuck materialism out the window or drain that materialist bathtub with who knows what other babies in it out the medieval Dark Ages drainage spout, and completely whole-clothedly replace it with some extreme and or absurd spiritual construct by proxy and through the same mechanisms of blind faith that you are clinging to the prior constructs. That's not what I'm suggesting at all, folks. I would never. But rather, for the purposes of exploration, let us set aside the limiting beliefs of this is a material world, there are no such things as spiritual energies, or any line of reasoning or blockading thinking that preempts, precludes, prevents, and prejudgmentally denies any and all possibility of a spiritual approach, so that we may perhaps avail ourselves of whatever power, healing, insight, growth, development, evolution, tool set, and practices we may then discover to be viable as we unbiasedly and unprejudgmentally, predeterminedly explore spiritual things. Why? Because here's that quote from Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, and why I will always genuinely, authentically, individually, and collectively recommend it as, truly, strongly recommended viewing for all people, whether you are already or not spiritually inclined. And I quote, and as I quote the following, let me just tell you right now that I've questioned this and thought it out and come at it from all kinds of angles, and I keep coming back to the position of, I cannot disagree with this. I must conclude it is valid and worth contemplating and worth retaining and worth reciting and worth repeating and worth resharing. So here we are. Okay, that wasn't the quote. Here's the quote. From somewhere in the middle of Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds. Quote, "The true crisis in our world is not social, political, or economic. Our crisis is a crisis of consciousness, an inability to directly experience our own true nature, an inability to recognize this nature in everyone and in all things. Realizing there is only one consciousness, to awaken one's true self, one must awaken all beings. There are innumerable sentient beings in the universe. I vow to help them all to awaken. My imperfections are inexhaustible. I vow to overcome them all. The Dharma is unknowable. I vow to know it. The way of awakening is unattainable. I vow to attain it." So powerful, so intense, so reverberating the impact those words have had on me since the very, very, very first moment I ever heard them, I ever watched them, I ever encountered them in that film, Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, that I've obsessive-compulsively rewatched that documentary series off again, on again, sometimes binging it several nights in a row, sometimes not watching it for months on end and then watching it again quite singularly, etc. And that I made a meme out of it, and that I've overshared that meme. Arguably, theoretically, to not sound overconfident, because I never want to be accused of making claims I have not actually made. I'm not pretending to be preaching at you folks as an enlightened being. I'm telling you that after 25 years of questioning through critical reasoning to the best of my ability, perhaps a bit unduly influenced by a bit of emotion, due to some very powerful, real-life, lived experiences that cannot be denied or debunked or taken away from me, right? And they are not articles of faith. Some things happened in my life, of which I tapped into and discussed either directly or indirectly in the past, in the podcast, sprinkled throughout various episodes, and about which I'm working on writing a sort of short memoir, as a sort of like, here's the definitive statement about the through line of the strangest of the strange of the spiritual experiences I've had, independent of studying spiritual schools of thought, independent of my opinion about spiritual concepts, ideologies, or traditions, before I ever declared I had experiences, right? Before I ever determined for myself any kind of organized or disorganized religious identity the way a lot of people do in this postmodern world. I had experiences in my life that were real, tangible, and undeniable. And thus, I return to the notion that a real spirituality, a true, genuine spiritual practice, independent of any claims from any existing, pre-existing, as in ancient and maybe no longer active, or soon to be existing as in emergent religious organizational dogma, that there must be and I keep using this analogy, which now unfortunately, but not unfortunately, now curiously has a crossover with Ukraine, but isn't inherently about that. Like a sunflower knows where the sun is in the sky, there must be organic, innate, built-in, instinctual, native to the species spiritual mechanisms, spiritual activities, the way dance has always been in us. Right? We may have formalized and then, socially constructed the invention of a art form based on the fact that dance has always been in us. But dancing and dance and that spirit, whatever that is, whatever that nuanced, gear shift, subtle, experiential, undeniable, but so impossible to pinpoint phenomena that arises out of us, most especially when we do it impulsively, unconsciously, without it being a big or when we do it professionally and with rigor and with then the wild abandon of an athlete, right? Like the zenning out is what I'm pointing to. When you dance, there's something that is evoked. Now, there are people in the world that have never in their life ever danced. And then growing up, and they just don't remember it, and then they had one negative negative feedback, negative emotional experience, and then they chose never to approach it again out of fear. And there are some people that just never got offered the opportunity to dance, and the inspiration has never quite appeared for them. But everyone should get what I'm saying, especially those who remember their childhood and the wild, silly frivolousness of it, and those who perhaps not remembering their own, but witnessing in others that fleeting, totally unfakeable joy of a few moments of jumping around and wiggling, either to music or to some inner flow of rhythmic impulse. There are these true things in the world, right? There are these true phenomena that genuinely and seriously happen, that we minimize and defeat with our cynicism. And I propose, dear friends, part of the point of this podcast is piecing together in a very disorganized, not attempting to be a major doctoral thesis or anything, just a casual chatting, sitting around the radio kind of, chat, talk show style audio blog. And today, dear friends, I feel I bring to you a sort of zooming in and then zooming back out series of of thinky thoughts about all of this. The first of which was all that, everything I just rambled about, leading up to and back to our central premise: peace through spiritual healing. We all want peace, right? The world, arguably, the world around, only those who are psychotic and or engaged in profiteering, on the very act of conflict. Only those people desire for war to rage on. Most everyone else, that anyone that is moderately well-adjusted and longs for the peace and comfort of living their life, and curiously, we live through conflict events and quite theatrically hyper monitor and hyper monetize the latest and greatest, newest and most shocking of clashes, even as ongoing conflicts get treated as if they've become tedious and boring to watch. And we preoccupy ourselves, here's a bit of social critique, we preoccupy ourselves, even when, as I mispronounce it, we preoccupy ourselves with the great debates of meaningless debates. Who started it? Whose fault is it really? How can we end it? What should we do about it? What can we do that isn't escalatory? How do we de-escalate? Blah, 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 and around and around and around in circles we go. And, we've extended that array, that spectrum of ancillary, secondary, and tertiary commentary, and sort of the feedback loops of micro and macro echo chamber media tendencies. We give so much more attention to the diverse array of things that essentially are, about the thrill of chasing down a rabbit down a rabbit hole, chasing a rabbit down a rabbit hole. And these things, more often than not, do not directly contribute to deep, meaningful spiritual healing. Do they? Debating whether or not this country is being an uninvited aggressor or a justified preemptive strike defender is a fascinating, endless merry-go-round of debate, because no matter what, they did, whoever they are, in a purely theoretical situation, I'm just analyzing the fact that these debates happen. There's no, in a situation where the rationale is, whether real or otherwise, the rationale is genuinely meant as a pretextual excuse to engage in the conflict, it becomes a self-fulfilling circle of, well, everyone's arguing about whether or not this nation that has taken an action is the good guy taking a preemptive strike self-defense action, or a bad guy taking preemptive strike act of aggression. Doesn't solve the problem of the bombs and munitions dropping on innocent civilians, right? It doesn't whatsoever. So why are we so emotionally invested in the treadmill of debate, when what we can, could, should, would, ought to be doing, not because I say so, but because it would be the most spiritually divine thing to be doing, and that is, right, like manifesting peace, creating peace, choosing peace, voting for peace with our spiritual voting powers, trying to embody peace so that peace may be embodied. For, dear friends, I would argue with you, I would suggest to you for your consideration, is what I mean by argue. I mean argue in the polite, genteel sense of not a social media street brawl over who's right and wrong, but rather a comfy couch academia discussion over tea and crumpets about which ideas are which ideas and how to go about exploring and pursuing a genuine, functional, problem-solving solution. If the true crisis is not one of that variable, this variable, or another variable, right? If our true crisis isn't about socioeconomic, political actions, but rather a tangible miscalibration at the spiritual level of how we relate to one another, caused by trauma that creates suffering and pain, and therefore ego-driven, disgruntled, needy, wanting yearning for something to make the pain go away, then we should change our tactics, right? If arguing about political agendas is never going to solve the problem of political corruption, because political corruption is caused more so by the root spiritual trauma that resides in the individual and the collective body's spiritual dimensions, right? Your individual body has a material dimension, an energetic dimension, a mental consciousness dimension, and a spiritual energies dimension, right? The various levels of your astral bodies. And there's different names, and there's different titles, and there's different schools of thoughts, and there's different ways of pronouncing, and there's different ways of evoking, there's different ways of describing, but let's not get caught up in that. These things are there, and either you pursue the self-awareness and the self-education required in order to be attenuated enough to your own being, attenuated enough to your own sensations at the smallest, subtlest levels, so that you can discover, rediscover, remember how to engage with and utilize these spiritual tools through spiritual practice. Eternal peace, peace through spiritual healing. We could have a huge debate and get all ego-driven and materialistic about whether or not spiritual healing is possible, and then proceed to another level of debate where we argue about which modality, which practice, which tactical description, which brand of spiritual healing is the righteous one. Or we can turn within. As the most beautiful, often the most ancient, but also the most relevant of the newly rediscovered spiritual wisdom indicates, we all have a responsibility to turn within and find our own inner guru that speaks, often wordlessly, as in the language not of our human word thought image, but through a language of tactile, phenomenological, sensory awareness and knowing. And in order to approach that inner guru, in order to be ready to receive that kind of guidance, in order to be responsible enough to open up that internal tool set, because it's a dangerous tool set, and it's not an easy to wield tool set. And I say dangerous because it will bring about like an honesty and a challenge to yourself that can be humbling or can be maddening, if depending on how dislocated from your own reality you are, depending on how caught up in and contingent upon belief of externalized dogma you've become in order to maintain your sense of balance. So it's work, it's hard work, it's not easy work. We all live in glass houses, and everyone's ready to chuck a stone at another motherfucker, but no one's ready to sit in their glass house and meditate with the stone. Right? For fear that some motherfucker's gonna chuck a stone at our glass house. Everyone's got a beam in their eye, and no one's helping themselves or their brothers pull it out. They're all busy bitch smacking everyone else and pointing at the beam in everyone else's eye to completely brutally misconstrue not misconstrue, because I think my interpretation of them is correct, miscombobulate. In other words, I didn't say them very accurately. Some age-old ancient wisdoms from spiritual texts. The world is a mysterious place. It works in mysterious ways, and it also is a mundane place and works in some painfully mundane ways. And these two things are not mutually exclusive. So we should not pretend that they are. These two things are mutually co-creating, mutually arising, mutually co-defining, mutually there's another term, but I don't know what it is. Mutually, relatively, like, relational in how they bring each other and themselves into existence. And my point in saying that is that, we can choose to live in denial of that, or we can choose to register that reality and relearn, rediscover how to engage with both sides of that paradox. For as somebody puts it in some meditation somewhere, the spiritual path is defined by living paradoxes. And it is between them, and I'm again paraphrasing severely to the point of unrecognizability, it's navigating between them, treading that balancing point between the paradoxes, where we reveal to ourselves our spiritual path. Do I think that we'll end this conflict or that conflict, any of the 50 some odd conflicts raging around planet Rock right now in this timeline, or any of the endless number of conflicts raging around every timeline on planet Earth, planet Dirt, planet Mud, planet Water, planet Sea, planet Earth, planet Sky, they're all, in every timeline, except for the most exceptionally up high on the multidimensional spectrum chart of all probable waveform functions, and they're experiencing as close as you can get to that bliss here in this world, in that timeline. In terms of creating heaven on earth, I think that's the calling we're meant to rediscover and re-engineer how to do. How to transmute our individual collection of multi-pronged probability waveform timelines, all the different me, myself, and I that I am, and all the different probabilistic outcome variable timelines, not by creating a synergy of our actions, not the external ones anyways. They can each be living radically different lives in completely different settings, doing in completely different circumstances, doing completely different things. But as long as they're on a journey inward, we can synchronize and sort of reassimilate, synergize, there's another word, there's a word I'm looking for. It's not synthesize, but it's very close. Reintegrate all of our various variants, all of the other me, myself, and I's in my own parallel inner dimensions of all of my probable waveform function expressions, right? And reconnect them internally to my core self, the higher self, the Atman of all my Atmans. Or maybe that's the Anatman of all my Atmans, right? If Atman is the personalized soul self, the me here in this body, in this timeline, in this time frame, in this planet Rock, as opposed to the me in that timeline, in that time frame, on that planet Dirt, those are Atman, if I'm remembering correctly. Although vocabulary words flip-flop around in terms of, especially if they're polemic ones, in terms of use, common use in various timelines, so it's irrelevant. But you'll get what I'm saying. My personalized soul and my alternate variant, and there's a spectrum of them, all the variations that my tree of probability waveform function branches are exploring, that this person can choose, this soul. can bifurcate an infinity of times to explore all these probabilistic outcomes. We all have that. That's our inner, private, individual tree of life. And that inner, private, individual tree of life with all these probabilistic multiple selves, all these variants, is but one branch on us. It's but one stem. Let me fractally adjust my scale setting. My collective tree of all my selves is but one stem breaking off from a branch that's broken off from a tree trunk of the collective probability waveform function tree of many lives, being churning through L space. L space is what I call the nexus plane for any given individual, where it can sort of like aggregately experience and or monitor all of its individuated Atman soul selves, and also sort of commune with itself as a meta archon, the being that is all of the beings that are me. And there we can relate with our fellow meta archons, but that's a whole nother discussion. That's a spiritual place that I posit theoretically, again, because of lived experience, and things that I've read that correlate and seem to act as vindicating evidence. In this world, in the material world that we all cohabitate, that phenomena I just described is valid in all dimensions, all the ways, all the angles you can imagine, from the interpersonal individual to the intrapersonal collective, and everything in between. And if we want to experience a time in which our children or our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren truly, genuinely experience the kingdom of heaven on earth here in the material world, peace, not through strength and fear and preemptive strikes and rationalization of violence in order to prevent other violence, but through the co-creation and collaborative manifestation of the highest order of energy and consciousness that these life form bodies we inhabit are capable of. And if we're going to pursue that, we need, dear friends, as I keep bringing the discussion back to, turn inwards and heal. And I think to get to like practical steps, the simplest, most fundamental thing, and forgive me if it's redundant, but I think it's this important, it's that important. It is therefore so important that I don't mind being redundant. The baby step 0 is to make the effort to break away from all of the external activities, as difficult and as arduous and as boring and as tedious and as yucky and as lame and as sucky as that sounds. It's to carve out time incrementally on a day-by-day basis to sit with our wretched selves alone in some silence and deal. And by deal, I mean truly confront the darkness in ourselves, armed with not the tools of murder and butchering, but the tools of forgiveness healing. Literally, the two tools of forgiveness and healing, and to look within and to take on, step up to, embody, and step into being the challenge of self-forgiveness, of self-healing, of truly confronting our inner selves, our weaknesses, our flaws, our failures, both imagined and real or neglected. And those are different things that must be approached differently. And thus that work is hard enough. That work will be time-consuming enough. And that work is personal and individual enough that what other instruction can I give you besides training wheels? And plenty of people have made some really great training wheels, and there's no shame, right? Like, we will need training wheels for quite some time. So once you've really, really addressed sitting with yourself in silence, and I always suggest a 9-9-9 challenge. 9 minutes a day for 9 days, and then like as a minimum threshold. And then once you hit 9 days, then you're like, okay, next up, I'm going 9 minutes a day for 9 weeks. And then once you hit 9 weeks, you're like, okay, wherever I'm at, I'm now starting 9 minutes a day for 9 months. And then if you quickly slide into 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes, half an hour, great. If it always is just 9 minutes, that's fine. You don't want to slide any less then. You want to build, right? Like that one funny meme, which is really ancient wisdom, says, if you're stressed or angry, you should meditate 30 minutes a day. And if you're busy, you should make that an hour. It's a challenge, and it's a paradoxical one. Sit with the self. Look within. Silence. Seek out the silence in the mind. Don't tyrannically enforce it. That's unhealthy. Seek it out. Cultivate it. Discover it. Enable it by healing your thoughts as they distract you from the silence. How do you heal them? By forgiving them. Like they were petulant little children screaming at the dinner table about something outside. You smother them in love. You attend to them, but you don't prolong the engagement. You acknowledge that they've been heard. You tell them that they're behaving naughty. You douse them with love energetically. You tell them that you are forgiving them and you are encouraging them to behave, and then you set them aside. I always like to imagine taking these thoughts like they were little weird toddler baby toys that are wobbling around, hopping and jumping and screaming and throwing a tantrum, and I pick it up, whatever it is. I need to take out the trash. I'm a terrible person and I can never succeed. Whatever the garbage thought is. And you pick it up and I mentally imagine holding it in my hands/arms like I'm going to hug it. And I give it a hug and I pet it like I'm going to pet it and love it and squeeze it and name it Charlie and love it, like that Warner Brothers cartoon, except not like that Warner Brothers cartoon. And I genuinely just go, hush, hush, little baby, you're an irritating baby, you're upset, it's okay, I forgive you, I hear you, I understand you, you don't need to make a commotion. And then I visualize putting it like I'm reaching up into my own head and putting them on top of the altar in the temple at the center of my mind. And on that altar, there is a divine light that shines down from whatever the great cosmic heavens are, and that light is the ineffable being that we quite ridiculously have nicknamed God, and it is not here to lecture me or punish me, but to transmute the objects or things or beings or ideas or concept models or ideology or visualizations or whatever it is that I put on that altar in the sacred divine temple in the center of my mind. That is where I go. That is the Holy of Holies, where we all can go to commune directly with the light of God. And I imagine that there's always a sort of like spotlight down on the temple, and that's the permanent connection. That's the baseline energy flow of like, yep, you're on the line with God, because God is what? The innermost thing that is emanating outwards into existence. It's inside every quark. It's beyond the inside of all subatomic, subelectronic, subquark, subplanck length, subfractal zone, whatever they are, that are fomenting up from nothingness to manifest reality. That's where the singularity, the real singularity, the original singularity, the consciousness, the core cosmic I am is rooted, and it can't be taken away, and it's always there to silently consume, like an infinite audience of viewership, all that which is being witnessed at any level through any vessel that has life and a sensory apparatus. And it's to that which we are, when we really genuinely are praying, it's with that with which we are engaging, right? It's with that with which we are communing. And prayer it shouldn't be a beggar's list of like, please give me these things that I may or may not deserve just because I'm begging nicely. That's not prayer. Prayer is visualizing a desired outcome and then like receiving the energy and the ingredients for how to make that desired outcome possible. That's the conversation that we have with God. Inspire me, God. That's why the best prayers are the ones that start with things like, give me strength to do your will, right? Not because God is a dictator and we're supposed to blindly do what he tells us, but because God is the very all caps life force, which is that immutable, indescribable, inscrutable, ineffable thing that drives all of causality. Everything that's ever been done has been done because that thing we call the life force is animating that which is alive. From your genomes, at the center of every cell, at the center of every bit of flesh and tissue, right? These genomic strands are an infinity of individuals collectively doing a really crazy collection of things that I wouldn't even begin to know how to do on my own in this level of awareness, using my English sentence-making thinky thought brain, of how to instruct them how to do it. Dear hair, please proceed throughout my life to extend through cellular accumulation at a receptacle of tissue gathered through the aggregate dissemination of nutritional building blocks that I've digested through my digestive system without worrying about how that works, so that my hair will grow longer and occasionally vary in coloration for funsies. Like, what? It just does what it does because God, not the tyrannical cartoon character of God that we have been told to fear and beg dictator guide, instruction from, but the divine grace that is the life force itself knows what it's doing. It knows how to drive the engine of molecular genomics so that every cell in every bit of tissue, in every living, slimy, gross life pod that eats and poops and breathes and stares out dumbly at the world, knows how to do being alive without the knucklehead that thinks it's in charge actually understanding any of it. So if that's true about our own bodies, some level of that must be true about the universe itself. And we, at these individuated levels, as an analogy, can think of ourselves as the genomic, strand of genetic material at the center of every nucleotide that drives and occupies and controls every cell in our bodies. Because it's all a fractal, and all fractals recursively reiterate through repetition, so that complexity is built out through deepening levels of this recursion. And if we are the leaves on the tree of life, as well as the tree of life itself, then when we pray and when we engage in a genuine, authentic dialogue of communion with these various aspects of the multiplex we call self, we can perhaps access, utilize, and bring about into existence the spiritual tools that heal this deep-seated spiritual corruption we've long neglected, which is the material cause in this externalized world for all the corruption and violence and grotesquerie. Peace through spiritual healing. Be the change you want to see in the world. Take responsibility for your own spiritual healing. Then, once your cup is full, once you know you've confronted that long, dark tea time of the soul, enough that you've transcended your prior limited mode of operation, without falling for the false ego trap of thinking you've achieved it all and are now a supreme enlightened being, because you're not. Because until, and I really do believe this, it's one of the few things that I've come to the conclusion that even if I don't have enough evidence to support it, I'm going to say I believe it is to be true. And that's that until we can collectively, as a species, fully activate our multidimensional chakra systems, both individually and interconnectedly as a species in a collective way, therefore being able to deploy individually and collectively a fully functional Merkaba chariot of light, which is the meta-spiritual technology required. It's a prerequisite for the full and complete opening, the full, real big, blown-out opening of the third eye, which then transmutes the body into living light. So we must be vigilant that we do not fall into the ego trap of patting ourselves on the back and believing ourselves to be morally superior, having achieved some sort of enlightenment, whilst spewing mockery, ridicule, and judgment at others for their having not. That's a real danger that is really preventing us from making huge strides of progress in the very real ways that we can incrementally, progressively develop and evolve towards this birthright of species-wide third eye opening, transformational, transmutational, metaphysical, metacosmic, spiritual healing. Go forth and meditate deeply, dear friends. Sit down in darkness with yourself and grind those levels of forgiveness healing, to borrow some video game terminology. Polish that mirror at the center of your experience, as the ancient wisdom teaches. Polish that mirror until you see clearly your true nature. Reintegrate the darkness and the light. The yin and the yang are not at war with each other. Those two wolves you have inside of you, they're twins, not enemies. Our job is not to kill our ego, but rather to transformatively heal our ego. To attend to this ancient, long-neglected trauma that is at the rotten, gooey, gross, nuggety center of the darkness in our souls. The true crisis in our world is not social, political, or economic. Our crisis is a crisis of consciousness, an inability to directly experience our true nature, an inability to recognize this nature in everyone and in all things, realizing there is only one consciousness. To awaken one's true self, one must awaken all beings. There are innumerable sentient beings in the universe. I vow to help them all to awaken. My imperfections are inexhaustible. I vow to overcome them all. The Dharma is unknowable. I vow to know it. The way of awakening is unattainable. I vow to attain it.